There is something we don't talk enough about when we talk about commitment. Sometimes staying committed does not mean continuing to do the same thing. Sometimes the thing you committed to is still right, but the way you are trying to get to it isn't. The plan fails. Circumstances change. You learn something that you didn't know before. An opportunity disappears. Another one appears. And suddenly you have a choice. Do you keep pushing because you said you wouldn't quit? Or do you change your approach because the approach that you were on is no longer working? That distinction matters, because there is a difference between giving up on what matters and giving up on the method that isn't getting you there. That's where wisdom comes in. You can change the route without abandoning the destination. You can adapt without becoming directionless. And you can remain committed to a future version of yourself while changing what you have to do to become that person. So the question isn't simply, do you stay committed? The better question is, what should you keep fixed and what should you allow to change? One of the reasons people struggle with change is that they sometimes confuse commitment to a goal with the commitment to the way they originally imagined reaching it. And those are not the same thing. Imagine someone who wants to become financially independent. They start a business. It doesn't work. They have a choice. They can decide, I said I was going to build this business, so I'm going to keep doing exactly what I'm doing. Or they can step back and ask a better question. What was I actually committed to? Maybe it wasn't that particular business. Maybe it was independence. Maybe it was building something of their own. Or maybe it was creating a more stable future for their family. The method was never the mission. And this applies far beyond money. A career can change. A business can change, a relationship can change, and a plan can change. Even the way you develop yourself can change. That doesn't automatically mean that you've abandoned the person you're trying to become. Sometimes adaptation is exactly how you remain faithful to that person. Because commitment gives you something to hold on to, but adaptation gives you the ability to keep moving when reality changes the route. And that's an important distinction. Hold firmly to what matters. Stay flexible about how you get there. A lot of people make a mistake when they commit to something. They commit not only to the outcome, but they also commit to the way they believe that outcome has to happen. And when that method stops working, they feel like changing it means admitting that they were wrong. It doesn't. Sometimes the most committed thing you can do is change the plan. Think about someone who is building a career. They may have spent years preparing for a particular position, only to discover that the industry is changing. They might have the temptation to say, I've already invested too much to change now. But investment does not make a failed route successful. The question is not, how long have I been doing this? The question is this still taking me where I said I want to go? That is the difference between commitment and attachment. Commitment is attached to what matters. Attachment is attached to how you imagined it would happen. And life does not care how you imagined it. Reality gives you information. Sometimes that information says, keep going. Sometimes it says, try another way. Changing the route does not mean abandoning the decision. In fact, sometimes refusing to change the route is the very thing that takes you farther away from it. Now, this is where things become more difficult, because adaptation can become an excuse too. Someone fails once and immediately quits. Something becomes difficult and they decided it is not for them. A better option appears and suddenly they have a new direction. That isn't adaptation. That's avoidance. So how can you tell the difference? When you're persistent, you ask, what am I still committed to? But if you're stubborn, you ask, how do I prove that I was right? Those are completely different questions. You see, persistence is willing to learn. Stubbornness refuses to. Persistence can change its methods. Stubbornness keeps repeating the same behavior simply because changing it feels like defeat. And adaptation has the same test. Healthy adaptation changes its approach because reality has changed. Unhealthy adaptation changes the goal because the original goal becomes difficult. That distinction matters because if you change everything every time reality pushes back, you never build anything deep enough to compound. But if you refuse to change anything, you can spend years defending a path that stopped making sense long ago. The goal isn't to become someone who never changes, and it isn't to become someone who never quits. The goal is to become someone who knows what is worth holding on to and what is worth changing. Now, there is a simple way to make this distinction clearer. We're going to separate your commitment from your method. Your commitment is the thing that you are unwilling to abandon because it matters to you. Your method is the way you are currently trying to get there. Those two things should not have the same level of rigidity. Maybe you're committed to being financially secure. That does not mean that you have to stay in the very first career that you choose. Maybe you're committed to being present for your family. That does not mean that your schedule can never change. Maybe you're committed to building something of your own. That does not mean that the very first business that you started has to be the business that you keep. You see, the danger comes when we make the method sacred, because then changing course feels like a betrayal. But sometimes changing course is exactly what protecting the commitment requires. That is the difference between saying, this matters so I will find another way, and saying, this is the way I choose so I have to make it work. Those are not the same levels of commitment. One is loyalty to what matters. The other can be loyalty to your own history, and your history does not deserve control over your future simply because you have time invested in it. Sometimes the strongest decisions that you can make is to keep the promise while changing the plan you originally made to keep it. But as we talk about this, there's another problem. How do you know when adaptation is actually necessary? You see, because you can talk yourself into changing almost anything. So before you change direction, ask yourself a harder question. Is the problem the destination, or is it the route? If the destination still matters, examine the method. Is it producing the result? What have you learned? What has changed since you started? What would happen if you tried a different approach? And most importantly, am I changing because the evidence tells me that I should, or because continuing has become uncomfortable? That question can save you from two opposite mistakes. You can quit something meaningful because the first attempt becomes difficult, or you can stay trapped into something that is ineffective because changing feels like admitting defeat. Neither one is wisdom. Wisdom is being able to look honestly at what is happening and make adjustments that the situation requires. Sometimes that means staying. Sometimes that means changing. Sometimes it means slowing down. Sometimes it means starting over with everything that you've learned. The point is not to become someone who never changes, and it is not to become someone who changes constantly. The point is to become someone who can tell the difference, because commitment can give you the direction. Adaptation can give you the mobility to keep moving toward it. And when those two work together, changing your method is no longer a failure of commitment. It becomes an expression of it. So, by now, you may be able to see the difference between commitment and adaptation. But there is a practical question. How do you use that distinction when something in your own life isn't working? Let's start with the thing that matters. Ask yourself, what am I actually committed to? Not the position that you hold, not the business that you started, not even the plan you made 3 years ago. What is underneath all of that? Maybe it was providing for your family, independence, meaningful work, becoming a person that you respect. Whatever it is, identify it. Then ask the second question. What part of the way I am pursuing isn't working? Now be honest. Maybe the results aren't there. Maybe circumstances have changed. Maybe you've learned something that you didn't know when you started. And then comes the third question. What can I change without abandoning what matters? That's the test. Because now you're separating the commitment from the method. You're not asking yourself whether you should give up. You're asking yourself whether the way you're working toward it still makes sense. And that's a much better question, because sometimes protecting what matters requires you to change the plan. Understanding the difference is useful, but knowing the difference isn't enough. You have to be willing to act on it, because there will be moments when the evidence is clear, and the hardest part isn't knowing what needs to change. It is accepting that you are the person who has to change it. So tomorrow, take one situation in your life where you've been trying the same approach without getting the results that you need. Don't choose the biggest problem in your life. Choose one that you can actually do something about. Write down what you're trying to accomplish. Then write down what you have been doing to accomplish it. Now look honestly at the gap between the two. If the method isn't producing the result, don't defend it simply because you've already invested time in it. Change one part of the approach. Change the schedule. Maybe change the process or the environment. Ask for help. Maybe even learn something that you were missing. Try the approach that you kept putting off, but make one deliberate adjustment, not 10. Then give that adjustment enough time to produce evidence. That's important. Adaptation isn't randomly changing direction every time something becomes difficult. It's making a deliberate change, watching what happens, learning from the result, and adjusting again when necessary. That is how you stay moving without becoming trapped by your original plan. And here's the part I want you to remember. You're not required to remain loyal to a method that has stopped serving the thing that you care about. You are responsible for knowing why you're moving and being willing to change how you get there. So tomorrow, identify one thing that you will protect and one thing you will change. Then act on it. Because sometimes holding the line doesn't mean standing still. Sometimes it means finding another way forward. So, we see in this episode, sometimes the path changes. Sometimes the plan you started out with no longer works. And that does not mean that you have failed. It means that you have learned something that the original plan couldn't teach you. The important question is not, am I still doing what I originally said I was going to do? The better question is, am I still moving toward what actually matters? Because Your future is not built by refusing to change. It's built by knowing what is worth holding on to and what you're willing to change to get there. Adaptability is not abandoning who you're becoming. It's learning how to keep becoming that person when the path changes. So if you want to stay relevant in a world that keeps changing the path in front of you, and you want to learn to change your methods without abandoning the future that you're committed to building, subscribe. This is DB Lewis, and I'll see you in the next one.